Ian Holmes right back here in Shaw TV studios here on mid-Vancouver Island, getting right down to the details here of the Morden Mine situation. It's in a deteriorating state, and we have Eric Ricker, co-president of the Friends of Morden Mine, to go over the nuts and bolts of what's wrong with the Morden Mine sitting on provincial park land just south of Nanaimo on Morden Road. Eric, I'll let you take this one away. There's a lot of expensive problems with the Morden Mine. From your vantage point, where does it stand in terms of what needs to be done to fix this iconic structure?
Right now, Ian, we've got an engineering company working on the site to give us a good idea of what needs to be done and what it will cost. We've never had that before, even though this is the fourth engineering study that's been done. These images that are coming on the screen will indicate some of the problems. The first one was showed what's called the tipple, which is half the structure, which are the loading chutes. And that very large chute there, which is off the screen again, back on again, is beside the head frame, which housed the elevator that took the miners down. That chute is where they brought the coal up from the depths and dumped it into lower chutes, which you don't see in that particular picture. But you can see that chute itself is looking a little rough. The legs on which it is, it's effectively a second story to the tipple structure. Those legs are badly eroded around the base, and I think one of the images coming up will indicate that fairly clearly. They all need to be repaired and reinforced. That's one of the big issues with the structure. All of the legs on the perimeter around that tipple have deteriorated. Here you see one of the legs that's effectively a second story leg, and it too is deteriorated around the base. So it's the reinforcing rods that are now holding that in place. There's not enough concrete there to be doing much of a job. This particular view is in the back side of the structure. The parking's on the front side for people when they come in, and this too shows the tipple and the head frame and the sort of rough appearance of each one. But the engineers tell us these are not problems that can't be dealt with. This particular shot gives you the head frame right at its top. You see those turning wheels at the top that brought the elevators up and down. And you can see on that cross beam there that there's serious deterioration there that needs to be fixed.
And from the estimates we have here from...
By the way, here's a closer up view of that, and you can see in that case the concrete is just spalled right off the reinforcing rods, which are keeping it in place.
Now, the estimates we have from the folks at the BC, the Environment Ministry, BC Parks, is we're looking about somewhere in the range. We don't, in the engineering study, we'll find out a lot more, which will be released soon. But we're looking at around $500,000, and then the long-term restoration work north of $2 million. Is that kind of what you're expecting to come out of this engineering study to be released?
I don't really know, and I want to be clear about this. These are figures that we provided the Environment Ministry. They didn't provide them themselves. Okay. And I have to say this, that it's really a mistake to put out figures like this without qualifying what they mean. In the first case, the contractor, John Napa, came up to the site at our invitation, and he gave us a rough estimate of $250,000 to $500,000 to stabilize the structure and make sure it's there for permanent work later on. That was just a contractor's guesstimate, if you like. An educated guesstimate, but that's what it was. And then he presented that figure to Minister Terry Lake at the time we met with him in 2012. The second figure comes from our landscape architect, and that too is a guesstimate, even more of a guesstimate, I would say, than the first figure. She was looking at a long-term fix-up and taking contractors' rates and working with that kind of data to estimate a cost. But she didn't really know how many hours it would take, and we still don't know how many hours it would take. The current study, which is the fourth engineering study done at this site, is going to give us that information. And the reason we're doing this study is because when Terry Lake, the previous environment minister, met with us, he ordered another engineering study to get a better idea of what needs to be done. That study, in turn, recommended the study that we're now doing. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, and I think it should be a matter of great embarrassment to them, the government decided not to participate in this study, even after we got local governments in Nanaimo to contribute a substantial amount to it. So they have effectively decided, by deciding not to fund the study, that they want nothing to do with Morden Mine. They don't even really care what it's going to cost to fix it, because they won't help pay for the study that's going to give us that information.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
That's deplorable.
Right, we'll get into that in a little bit.
Sure.
This engineering study, the results should become quite soon. Eric?
Yes, we expect them around the end of the month, according to their work plan. End of the month, sometime early in October. We'll know at that time what it is that they think needs to be done to fix it, and how much it'll cost, both in the long term and the short term.
You touched on the issue of the challenges and some issues with the provincial government, and we'll examine that now here on the challenges of fixing the Morden Mine. Our next discussion point here, Eric, this memo here from the Ministry of Environment, which you're very aware of, which Shaw TV has obtained, that the province interested in considering divesting Morden Park. They're saying this is too much of a liability financially. They don't have the funds to fix it short term or long term, essentially saying that this is something that we don't want to have anything to do with from a funding capital perspective. Eric, that's something from the Friends of Morden Mine, must be something that's a huge roadblock, which sits on provincial park land to really get this thing restored.
Well, I'd say the first thing about this is that we are supposed to be the partners of the government in looking after this park, planning for its future, and up until the present minister, that's what we were. Now the current minister, Mary Polak, and BC Parks are saying, we can't afford this, and we're not even going to look at it anymore, and we wish you the best, go out and raise the money yourselves. Meantime, they're pouring over $4.5 million to buy into Quadra Island to buy a piece of land to expand one of 3 provincial parks on that small island. The land they're buying is steep sloped. Will never be used by anybody. It's just going to be there for scenic backdrop, because they don't want a logging company to log off the slope and have boaters and kayakers and so on look at it. That's a very, very expensive undertaking. Up until the point of that announcement, we were prepared to believe BC Parks when they said, well, we just don't have the money for Morden. We're interested, but we don't have the money. That was acceptable, but it's now very clear they have the money, and they're spending it elsewhere. Also, the minister announced in the Times Colonist not too long ago that the budget for parks had increased by $2 million under her watch. And of course, they decided none of that money is going to go to Morden. So the conclusion has to be, inescapably, they're not interested in Morden at all, despite what they say. And they think it's a do-it-yourself project. That's just unacceptable. Nanaimo taxpayers, and not to mention the thousands of mining families on this island, deserve much better treatment than that.
So where does that leave the Friends of Morden Mine? Do you wait for a changing political landscape, given this resistance from the provincial government? Clearly the responsibility, it's a provincial park. How do you attack this, Eric?
Well, the first thing, of course, is to wait for the study and see what it says. If it puts the price at remediation beyond anybody's idea of a reasonable amount, then we'll have to take stock of that and decide what to do. So if, for example, they said it's going to cost several million to fix up the site, unrealistic to think anybody's going to provide that kind of money. On the other hand, if they give us a staged program roughly of the kind that we've had from previous earlier guesstimates, then that should be doable. Right. And I don't think there's any excuse for the government to say, well, I'm sorry, we don't have $250,000 to stabilize Morden Mine. Well, they're spending millions on other parks, especially parks that people won't even be visiting. So I think they have a lot to answer for that way. If they choose not to answer to it, if they choose to stand their ground, then we will have to, of course, go to the Premier and make the case there. And one of the points I would like to make to the Premier is that we've had delegations coming to visit this site. Recently, the parliamentary delegation from Manchuria, of all places, came to visit the site. And they were amazed to hear that the province doesn't want to maintain the site, even though it's the only park that honors mining in British Columbia. What does that say about the government's attitude towards mining if it's not going to maintain the one park it has that honors mining, when a premier that is in office wants to build several more mines? The two things don't fit together. And so I think essentially the next stage would be to get the report, find out what the costs are going to be. If they're within reason, then we take it to the next level.
Eric, I'm not an engineer, but a common sense sort of way of looking at this would say to me that, hey, it needs obviously some emergency money. As we showed on the screen earlier, there's some of those supporting columns desperately need to be stabilized, obviously now. Can you start with, you inject some money to get the emergency funds, and then more to get a long-term approach at some other point down the road? Is that something that's been examined?
Yeah, we've been in this mode of thinking for quite some time. Shoring is one option to stabilize the structure. Could be the engineers will recommend that we do that. We don't know, but that is one option. Down the road, Morden needs an interpretation, and we'll get to this afterwards, right. But the community can play a big part in rehabilitating the park, but the actual structures, something for the government to look after, basically. It's not for fundraisers to run around and try and raise the money to do that. Park is their responsibility, and they should be looking after it.
The tourism side of things, and Eric touched on that. This is a very interesting one, and Eric has some points on this that I think that deserve some publicity here. There's a lot to gnaw off the bone here, not only with Morden Mine, but also the role that coal mining can play, a more visible role in Nanaimo's tourism landscape. More coming up on that as the Morden Mine discussion continues right here on Shaw TV with Eric Ricker from the Friends of Morden Mine.